My wife double-crossed me and called me the quiet, stable one to fund her affair. Little did she know I was building her trap. Can you imagine walking into a hotel lobby and seeing your wife, the woman you vowed your life to, stepping out of an elevator, laughing and chatting with your own brother? It felt like a punch to the gut, but that was just the appetizer. What came next was a cold, calculated betrayal that would reshape my entire world, orchestrated by the very people I trusted most. Let me tell you about myself because it matters for everything that happened. I'm not a loud person. Never have been. I run a private credit firm, the kind that funds construction and real estate. It's the kind of work nobody finds interesting at a dinner party, but it makes serious money precisely because it operates out of the spotlight. My car doesn't announce anything. My watch tells time and nothing else. My world is deliberately small. I've always believed that the less you perform, the more clearly you can see who's performing around you. My name is Julian Vance, and I was 34 when all of this unfolded. I'd been married to Clara Vance for 4 years. She was the kind of woman who filled a room, warm, socially fluent, always knowing the right thing to say. We weren't perfect. She craved more visibility than I was ever going to give her, more of a husband who wanted to be seen. I understood that friction, and I honestly thought we were managing it. I had never once given her a reason not to trust me. That wasn't arrogance. It was just the truth. Then there's my younger brother, Lucas Vance, 29. He was always the family favorite, in that specific way people without much to show for themselves become favorites through charm and the gravitational pull of being entertaining. He'd been between jobs more than he'd been in one. I'd actually covered him financially 3 times in 5 years. I didn't keep score. Family is family. That was my operating philosophy. Until a Wednesday night in October. A hotel charge appeared on a credit card Clara Vance had access to. 11 p.m., a hotel in the city. I wasn't traveling that week. I'd even texted Clara Vance around 9 p.m., asking about dinner plans for the next night. She replied instantly, said she was on the couch, relaxed, totally normal. I didn't say anything about the charge. I'm not impulsive, I verify. My firm handles billing disputes all the time, so requesting parking garage footage from the facility adjacent to that hotel was easy. I just cited a valet billing discrepancy on a corporate account. I do this professionally. I know which levers to pull without making a sound. The next morning, at my desk, I watched the footage. Clara Vance walked into the hotel at 10:48 p.m. 22 minutes later. Lucas Vance's car pulled in. I sat with that for about 10 minutes. Then I closed the file, finished my coffee, and went into a 9 a.m. call about a refinancing structure. That evening, I drove to the hotel, found a seat in the lobby cafe with a newspaper and an Americano. I waited. 2 hours and 11 minutes. When the elevator doors opened, there they were. Together. Unhurried, easy with each other in a way that just screamed, this isn't new. Clara Vance was tucking something into her bag. Lucas Vance was laughing at his phone. They moved through that lobby like people who had done this before and expected to keep doing it. I didn't follow them. I didn't record anything. I didn't call anyone. I just turned a page of the newspaper I wasn't reading and ordered another coffee. Now, here's what people expect when they hear a story like this. They expect a breakdown. They expect the person to fall apart, or erupt, or do something that reflects the sheer magnitude of what they just understood. But that's not how I'm built. When something detonates inside my life, I go quiet. I get precise. The grief was real. I won't pretend I felt nothing sitting in that lobby. But it didn't override my thinking. If anything, it cleared it. I went home. I made dinner. When Clara Vance walked in at 7 p.m., acting completely normal, I smiled and asked about her day. She said, "Quiet, just errands." I nodded, set her plate down, asked if she wanted wine. She said yes. I poured it. We ate dinner across from each other, talked about something neither of us would remember. And I looked at my wife, and I understood something clean and final about the shape of my life as it currently existed. Then my phone lit up. A text from my mother, Eleanor Vance. "Julian Vance, we need to have a family conversation. Come to the estate Sunday. It's important." Not Clara Vance. Not Lucas Vance. My mother. 3 days after I watched them walk out of a hotel together, my parents were summoning me, which meant whatever was waiting for me at that estate on Sunday wasn't a confession. It was a presentation. I didn't sleep much between Wednesday and Sunday. Not because I was falling apart, I wasn't, but because my brain doesn't shut off when it's working through something. I kept returning to the same detail. My mother sent the text 3 days after the hotel. Not Clara Vance. Not Lucas Vance. Eleanor Vance. Which meant she knew. Which meant the sequence of events I was walking into wasn't reactive. Nobody panicked and called a family meeting. Someone made a decision, assigned roles, and scheduled a time. I drove to the estate Sunday afternoon. My father, Arthur Vance, built it during the peak years of Vance Construction Group. It's the kind of house that announces what a man used to be. The grounds are still immaculate. The inside still smells like leather, and that specific kind of quiet, expensive houses have. I grew up in that quiet. I know exactly how much it can conceal. Eleanor Vance met me at the door. I've known my mother's face my entire life. I can read it like weather. What I saw wasn't grief, wasn't guilt. It was something prepared, practiced, the expression of a woman who had rehearsed this moment and was now executing it. She kissed my cheek and said it was good I came. Clara Vance was already in the formal sitting room. Lucas Vance was already there. Both seated. Positioned. I don't have a better word for it. They weren't just sitting in a room, they were placed. Arthur Vance stood at the side table with a decanter. Before I said a word, before anyone acknowledged what was happening, he poured whiskey into a glass and slid it across the table toward me. I looked at the glass, looked at the four of them, and sat down. Then Arthur Vance started talking. Clara Vance was pregnant. The baby was Lucas Vance's. They had known for several weeks. He didn't specify how many, but the flatness of his tone told me it hadn't been days. They'd known long enough to construct language around it, long enough for Eleanor Vance to find the phrase complicated mistake, which she called it with genuine confidence, as if that combination of words could do the work she needed it to do. Arthur Vance then said, I shouldn't destroy the family over emotions. I want you to sit with that for a second. My father said those words to me about my emotions as if the structure we were all sitting inside, the thing currently on fire, had been ignited by my feelings and not by the two people in that room who had spent an unknown number of months making decisions that couldn't be undone. Then came the ask. Lucas Vance's finances were temporarily unstable. Clara Vance had no independent income. The baby would need stability. I was the most financially capable person in the family. It would mean a great deal to everyone, to the child's future, if I would consider supporting them while they found their footing. Not Arthur Vance stepping in to support his son. Not Lucas Vance being held to any standard of responsibility. Me. The one sitting on the other side of what they did. Clara Vance spoke last. She said she still wanted me in the baby's life. Said I'd be such a wonderful presence. And this is the part I'll remember longest. She said I was the stable one. The room waited. I didn't yell. Didn't move. I sat completely still until I was certain they'd finished, until there was nothing left in the presentation. And then I asked one question. I kept my voice level because losing it would have given them something to manage, and I had no interest in being managed. So, all of you have already decided what my role is? Nobody answered directly. Arthur Vance gave a slow nod, the nod of a man who considered that a reasonable summary. Eleanor Vance reached over and put her hand on mine, like I was a child being walked through disappointing news. I picked up the whiskey, took one sip, set it down, and told them I needed time to think. The relief in that room was immediate and physical. Shoulders dropped. Eleanor Vance exhaled. Lucas Vance looked at the floor with something on his face I can only describe as satisfaction. I drove home without music, without calls. 40 minutes of silence while I reconstructed the actual timeline in my head. They had known for weeks before I found anything. Before the hotel footage. Before the lobby. Before dinner with wine and a conversation neither of us remembered. They didn't call me in to apologize. They didn't tell me because it was right. They told me because they needed my money and they needed my compliance. And they had calculated correctly based on everything they believed about me, that I would just absorb it. I got home, sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up a set of documents I hadn't looked at in months. The private loan agreements my firm had quietly extended to Vance Construction Group 18 months ago. When Arthur Vance's company was hemorrhaging cash it couldn't account for publicly and couldn't secure through conventional lenders. The loans were structured under my firm's name. Arthur Vance had been told the capital came from an outside investor who preferred anonymity. He had no idea the investor was his own son. Until now. I had no reason to use that information then. But I opened the folder and started reading the acceleration clauses. The acceleration clause in a private loan agreement is a beautiful thing when you're on the right side of it. Ours was standard in language and devastating in application. If evidence of fraud within the borrowing entity surfaced at any point during the loan term, full repayment became due immediately. Not on a schedule. Not negotiable. Immediately. I'd had attorneys draft that clause into every agreement my firm issued for exactly this reason. Businesses that need private financing when banks won't touch them are, by definition, carrying risk. You protect yourself accordingly. I read through the full agreement twice that night. Then I closed my laptop, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table until around 2 a.m., thinking through what I was and wasn't going to do. By the time I went to bed, I had a clear picture. I wasn't going to move yet. Moving fast would be satisfying for about 48 hours, and then I'd have nothing left. What I had was leverage. Real, structural, legal leverage. And leverage only works if you're patient enough to position it correctly before you deploy it. So I would wait. I would give them exactly what they expected from me. I would become, for the next several weeks, the version of Julian Vance they had already decided I was. Compliant, stable, useful. I want to be clear about something. Playing that role was not difficult. That's the part people find surprising when I explain it. They expect me to say it was agony. Sitting across from Lucas Vance at dinner, watching Clara Vance move through my house with the ease of someone who had already rewritten the story in her own head. It wasn't agony. It was information gathering. Every dinner, every casual text exchange, every moment Lucas Vance made a joke at my expense that the table laughed at. All of it was data. All of it was telling me exactly how little they feared me and exactly how fully they had written me off as a variable they had already solved for. That's useful to know before you move. Eleanor Vance started organizing family dinners with new frequency. United front, occasions dressed up as normal Sunday meals. I attended everyone. Told Arthur Vance I was working through it when he asked, and watched his face relax incrementally each time. Lucas Vance stopped being careful around me within 2 weeks. The jokes came back, the easy entitlement, the way he talked over me in conversation and nobody noticed or corrected it. Clara Vance began mentioning the guest room, started using the phrase co-parenting arrangement in casual conversation, as if the term required no acknowledgement of the things she was asking me to absorb. I smiled, said we'd figure it out. While I was performing, I was building 3 things. First, I engaged a legal document authentication firm, specialists in signature verification. I had them pull and analyze every Vance Construction Group contract from the past 6 years that authorized significant financial transactions. I had a suspicion about Lucas Vance and the company's books. Something in the loan application documents my firm had received 18 months ago had sat slightly wrong with me at the time, an irregularity I'd flagged internally, but not pursued because the loan was sound and the business relationship was with my father. I hadn't wanted to look too closely at something I didn't need to look at. I needed to look now. Second, I began mapping Clara Vance's pregnancy timeline using only information she'd shared voluntarily. The comments at dinners. Things she told Eleanor Vance that filtered back through the family. A remark she made to a friend at one of Eleanor Vance's gatherings that I overheard without trying. I was building a calendar, cross-referencing dates against what I could verify through travel records and our shared account history. What I was seeing didn't align cleanly with the story the family had presented. Not yet a conclusion, but a crack. Something that didn't sit flush. Third, I instructed my attorney to begin a quiet, fully legal restructuring of my asset position. Separating protected business accounts from shared marital assets, updating beneficiary designations, closing joint credit lines in a careful sequence that wouldn't trigger flags. Everything by the book, everything documented. By the time Clara Vance retained counsel, the financial landscape would look substantially different than she anticipated. I did all of this in the margins of a normal life. Between client calls, after dinners, on Sunday mornings before anyone else was awake. There was one moment that came close to breaking the compartmentalization. Late on a Tuesday night, I was pulling files from a cabinet in my home office, and a photograph fell out. A photo of Lucas Vance and me from a hiking trip we took maybe 6 years ago. Before marriages. Before the financial bailouts. Before any of this. We're both grinning like idiots, sunburned and tired, clearly at the end of something difficult we'd finished together. I held it for a while. Didn't analyze it, just held it. Then I put it in the drawer and went back to the authentication firm's preliminary request list.
That's all I'll say about that.
3 weeks into the performance, the authentication firm sent their initial findings. I opened the report at my desk on a Thursday morning with a second coffee. Read it the way I read everything. Straight through, no skimming. 3 contracts, 2021 to 2022. Vance Construction Group. Each one authorized the release of significant subcontractor payments. Each carried a signature block in Arthur Vance's name. The firm's analysis was unambiguous. The signatures did not match Arthur Vance's verified profile. They matched Lucas Vance's. My brother had forged our father's name on legal business contracts inside a company that my firm held the debt on. Contracts that released real money to subcontractors who may or may not have performed real work. Under the terms of our loan agreement, evidence of fraud within the borrowing entity triggered immediate acceleration. Full repayment on demand. I read the report twice, set it down, picked up my phone, and called my attorney. For words, start preparing the filings. Then I paused before hanging up. But don't file anything yet. I need to check something about the pregnancy first. I'm not a doctor. I want to be upfront about that because what I'm about to describe could sound more clinical than it was. I wasn't running a medical analysis. I was doing something much simpler. I was checking math. And the math wasn't adding up. The pregnancy timeline had been bothering me since the estate meeting, sitting just below everything else like a splinter I couldn't quite locate. Clara Vance had told the family she was 14 weeks along. That number had been presented with the kind of casual confidence that suggested it had been discussed and agreed upon before I walked into that sitting room. 14 weeks. Specific enough to sound precise, vague enough that nobody would think to verify it over whiskey solidarity. So I started there. I didn't need medical records to begin. I needed the information Clara Vance had already put into circulation herself. And in a family that talks the way mine does, that was considerable. I mapped what she told Eleanor Vance against what I'd overheard her tell a friend, against travel records I could access through our shared accounts, against text threads I had legitimate access to as her husband. I built a calendar, week by week, cross-referencing her stated timeline against documented movements. 14 weeks back from the date of the estate meeting put conception in a window that was, on its surface, plausible. It was close enough to the hotel footage that nobody would question it without looking carefully. But Lucas Vance wasn't in the country 14 weeks ago. He told me himself. He'd actually emailed me asking for a professional reference for a contracting opportunity overseas. CC'd me on a scheduling thread with a client. I had the email, time-stamped. He was out of the country for a 2-week stretch that sat directly inside the window Clara Vance's 14-week claim required. The timeline didn't work. Not with Lucas Vance. I brought this to my attorney and explained what I needed and why. Under the framework of an initiated divorce proceeding, his team filed a narrow legal request. Not for full medical records, which would have been a longer battle, but for a gestational dating document that Clara Vance had submitted to her insurance provider during prenatal registration. Insurance billing records are accessible under specific legal circumstances tied to marital financial disclosure. It wasn't a guarantee, but it came through within 10 days. I opened the document at my desk. The gestational age recorded on Clara Vance's prenatal insurance submission was not 14 weeks. It was 19. I'll tell you what 19 weeks meant. 19 weeks ago, Lucas Vance was overseas. I had documentation confirming it. his own email chain timestamped with me in the thread. 19 weeks ago, Julian Vance and Clara Vance were together. No travel, no separation, nothing unusual. A regular week and a regular month of a marriage I believed was difficult, but intact. So, whoever fathered this child, it wasn't Lucas Vance. The pregnancy was 5 weeks older than the story required. Clara Vance, or the family, or some combination of them, had chosen 14 weeks because it was close enough to plausibly implicate Lucas Vance. Because Lucas Vance's financial chaos made him a low-stakes named father. Because his character was pliable enough that he'd accept the role. Maybe he genuinely believed it. Maybe he didn't. Maybe that conversation happened in a room I'll never have access to. And because Julian Vance, stable, quiet, capable Julian Vance, was the financial infrastructure they needed to build around the whole construction. The baby wasn't Lucas Vance's. It had never been Lucas Vance's. And I had been asked to fund a fiction. This is the part of the story where I have to be honest about something. I held it together through the hotel footage. I held it together through the estate meeting, through the whiskey sliding across the table, through complicated mistake and destroy the family and the stable one. I held it together through 3 weeks of dinners and performance, and watching Lucas Vance make jokes at my expense while everyone laughed. This is the one that cracked something. Not publicly. Not in a way anyone saw. But late that night, sitting alone at my desk with that insurance document on the screen, I put both hands flat on the surface and stared at the wall for a long time without moving. Because this wasn't betrayal anymore. Not in any form I'd had a word for. This was architecture. Somebody had built a structure specifically designed to give this child a financial guardian while burying the actual story so deep it would never surface. I wasn't a wronged husband to these people. I was a funding mechanism. I was infrastructure. The plan was never for me to know. The plan was for me to write checks and be grateful I'd been given a role.
I sat with that for a while.
Really let myself sit with it. Then I stood up, made coffee, and went back to work. I instructed my attorney to pursue a DNA analysis through the standing our divorce filing had established. A court-authorized request to test biological samples from Clara Vance's disclosed prenatal documentation. Clean chain of custody. Unimpeachable process. The result came back on a Friday morning. The DNA profile did not match Lucas Vance. The report listed another man entirely. I read it once, placed it inside a leather folder on my desk, closed the folder, and set it near the door so I wouldn't forget it. I hadn't decided what to do with it yet. I had the loan acceleration. I had the fraud filing. I had the divorce restructuring. I had now this. What I didn't have was an occasion where all of it could land in the same room, at the same time, in front of the right audience, in a context that couldn't be quietly managed or spun afterward. My phone rang that evening. Eleanor Vance. She sounded excited, in the specific way she sounds when she's organized something she's proud of. She was putting together a baby shower at the estate. Not small. She'd invited extended family, some of Arthur Vance's professional contacts, people from their wider social circle. She wanted it to be visible, celebratory. She wanted the world to see the Vale family unified, and she wanted me there, smiling, present, seen supporting everyone the way a stable man supports his family. It'll be good for everyone to see we're solid, she said. I looked at the leather folder sitting by my door. I'll be there, I told her. I want to tell you about the week between that phone call and the shower, because it matters. I didn't spend it angry. Didn't spend it rehearsing what I was going to say or mapping out dramatic timing. I spent it working. Client calls, 2 deal reviews, a refinancing structure that needed attention. Normal week. I slept fine, ate regular meals, went to the gym 3 times. The leather folder sat by my door every morning when I left and every evening when I came back, and I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. I'd read it once, and I knew exactly what it said. What I was doing in the quieter moments was thinking about rooms. Specifically, who controls a room and how. My father had controlled the room at the estate by setting the agenda before I arrived, by having everyone already seated, by pouring the whiskey before I said a word. He'd walked me into a conclusion and presented it as a conversation. That's how Arthur Vance has operated my entire life. He builds the architecture of a moment before you enter it. And by the time you're inside, the exits have already been decided. Eleanor Vance's baby shower was going to be the same thing. A room built to consolidate something, to make it public, witnessed, real. A room designed to take whatever version of Julian Vance they'd been managing privately and stamp it into the social record. Here he is, present, supportive, stable, accepting. Once that image existed in front of 40 people, it would be very difficult to revise. I understood that. I just wasn't planning to let the room be theirs. I arrived at the estate exactly on time. Not early. Early would have meant helping set up, being absorbed into the occasion before it began. Exactly on time, dressed well, carrying the leather folder under my left arm with the same energy I carry documents into a client meeting. Because that's what this was. The house was full. Eleanor Vance had done what Eleanor Vance does when she's performing family. Flowers. Catering staff moving through the rooms. A photo area near the staircase. Gifts stacked in organized clusters. Extended family I recognized from holidays. A handful of Arthur Vance's professional contacts who had no idea what they'd walked into. Friends of Clara Vance's who knew the sanitized version of events and were here to celebrate accordingly. A server offered me a drink at the door. I took it, crossed the room. Lucas Vance was near the fireplace, holding court the way he always does when he has an audience, one hand gesturing, the other around a glass. Whoever was listening was already laughing at something he'd said. He saw me come in and gave me a nod. Easy. Comfortable. The nod of a man who had fully resolved his own guilt by telling himself I'd accepted the situation. Clara Vance was at the center of the room in a chair someone had decorated with ribbons, gifts stacked behind her. A group of her friends clustered nearby. She looked up when I walked in, and her face opened into a smile I recognized. Relieved.
Warm.
The smile of a woman who had been waiting to see whether the performance would hold. And here I was, on time, dressed, composed, confirming it. She gestured to the seat beside her. I crossed the room.
Sat down.
For 40 minutes, I played the role one final time. I accepted congratulations from people who had no reason to question what they'd been told. I answered questions with grace. I laughed where laughter was appropriate. Arthur Vance watched me from across the room, and I watched the tension in his shoulders drop in real time. Visible, physical relief. The relief of a man who had been managing a risk and now believed it had passed. Eleanor Vance touched my shoulder at one point, leaned close, said she was proud of how I was handling everything. I smiled and said nothing. Then Lucas Vance made his toast. He stood up near the fireplace and did what Lucas Vance does. He performed, thanked the family for their support, said he was going to be a great father, talked about the future with the easy confidence of a man who has never been held accountable for a single consequence of his own making. And then he looked directly at me across the room. Smiled the smile he's been smiling at me since we were kids, the one that says, "I know you'll be fine with this." And said something positioned as warmth, but landing like a flag planted in territory he'd already claimed. Julian Vance is the best big brother a guy could have. Polite laughter moved through the room. A few people glanced at me to gauge my reaction. Someone raised their glass. I set mine down. Stood up. The room quieted, ready for a reciprocal toast. People shifted to face me, glasses lifted. Eleanor Vance smiled from across the room. This was the moment she'd built the whole occasion for. Julian was standing, raising something, completing the picture. I opened the leather folder, removed a single document, held it steady so the room could see I was holding something without being able to read what it was.
Then I spoke. Clearly.
Without heat. Without performance. Before we continue, if this baby is really Lucas Vance's, why does the DNA report list another man entirely? Real silence sounds different than people expect. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't roll through a room in a wave. It just arrives. Instantaneous. One moment there's the ambient noise of a party, and the next there's nothing. A woman near the gift table stopped mid-reach and didn't complete the motion. Someone's fork clattered. A server in the doorway to the kitchen went completely still. Clara Vance's face strained. Lucas Vance looked at her. She didn't look at anyone. Arthur Vance said my name. One word.
Low.
A warning that had nothing left behind it. I looked at my father with an expression I've been practicing without knowing it for 4 weeks. Completely level. Completely settled. The face of a man who has already finished the calculation. Everyone else in the room is just beginning. I think everyone here deserves to know what they've actually been celebrating, I said. I placed the folder on the gift table. Open face up. Not as a taunt to the room. Not a performance. Just an acknowledgement. And walked toward the front door at the same pace I'd entered. At the door, I stopped. Turned back enough to find Arthur Vance in the room. You'll be hearing from my attorney Monday morning about the Vance Construction Group loan notes. All of them. I'd suggest having counsel ready. Then I walked out. I reached my car. The phone started before I'd closed the door. Lucas Vance declined. Clara Vance declined. Eleanor Vance, twice declined. I sat in the driver's seat and looked back at the estate through the windshield. Through the large front windows, I could see the room moving. Not celebrating. Not standing around in stunned quiet anymore. But actually moving. Lucas Vance's arms were gesturing towards Clara Vance. Arthur Vance was on his feet, face visible even from this distance. Eleanor Vance was moving between them with both hands up. The guests were clustered at the edges, some of them already on their phones. I'd seen enough. I started the car. My phone lit up one more time before I pulled out of the driveway. A number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I don't know what made me answer. Instinct, maybe. The same instinct that makes you read a document twice when something sits slightly wrong. The voice on the other end was male. Uncertain, like a man who had picked up the phone and put it down several times before finally going through with the call. He said his name was Nathanl. Said Clara Vance had given him this number 2 years ago and told him never to use it. Said he was sorry to call. Said he just had someone show up at his door claiming to be Clara Vance's attorney, and he needed to understand something before he decided how to respond. She told me the baby wasn't mine, he said. But I've been looking at some things she sent me before she cut contact, and the dates. I need to know. I put the car in park. Tell me everything, I said. Nathanl Ashby spoke for about 12 minutes. I didn't interrupt. I sat in the parked car outside my parents' estate with the engine off and let him talk, because the fastest way to get accurate information from a nervous person is to give them room to move through it at their own pace. He was a civil engineer. Measured. Precise. The kind of man who chooses words carefully, even when he's scared. He'd met Clara Vance at a professional conference roughly 2 years ago. They'd had a brief involvement. His word, involvement. That Clara Vance ended abruptly when he assumed she decided to recommit to her marriage. He hadn't pushed. He'd accepted it and moved on. Then 19 weeks ago, there had been one more contact. A single overlap that he said he wasn't proud of and hadn't sought out. After that, nothing. Clara Vance went completely silent. He'd assumed it was finished. He'd built a wall around it and gone back to his life. Then someone showed up at his front door claiming to represent Clara Vance legally, asking him to sign a document confirming he had no claim on any child born in the coming months. He hadn't signed anything. He'd closed the door and spent 3 days pulling apart everything Clara Vance had sent him before she cut contact, dates, references, a timeline that didn't match what the attorney had implied. He did the math. Then he called the number. I asked him one question when he finished. Whether he'd kept documentation of the timeline. Anything dated. Anything verifiable. He said yes. I told him to retain an attorney before he signed or said anything to anyone, and that my legal team would be in touch through proper channels. I told him this was no longer my situation to manage, and that he should focus on protecting himself. Then I thanked him, hung up, and sat quietly for a moment. The last piece. Not a surprise. The DNA report had already told me another man existed. But hearing a voice attached to it, hearing the specific shape of how Clara Vance had managed him, confirmed something I'd suspected since the estate meeting. She hadn't chosen Lucas Vance as the named father out of confusion or panic. She'd chosen him deliberately, surgically. because he was the one person in the available cast who was financially unstable enough to be a low-stakes liability and pliable enough not to ask hard questions. The plan was to give the child a named father who wouldn't matter financially and a financial guardian, me, who would. It was a good plan. It would have worked on the version of me they thought they knew. I started the car and drove home. Monday morning, my attorney filed on 3 fronts before 9 a.m. First, formal recall of the Vance Construction Group loan notes, invoking the fraud acceleration clause. Full repayment due immediately, triggered by the authenticated signature forgery evidence. Lucas Vance's confirmed forgery of Arthur Vance's name across 3 contracts authorizing the release of significant company funds. The documentation was clean. The chain of custody was unimpeachable, and there was no procedural angle available to delay it. Second, a criminal fraud referral citing the forgeries, filed with the appropriate authority. This one would move at its own pace. These things always do, but its existence immediately created a secondary problem for Vance Construction Group that had nothing to do with my firm. No conventional lender extends credit to a company operating under an active fraud referral. The business couldn't borrow its way out of what was coming. Third, my divorce petition, citing infidelity, with a full financial disclosure demand attached. The asset restructuring my attorney had completed in the prior weeks was entirely lawful and entirely documented. What Clara Vance's attorney would find when they began the disclosure process was a financial landscape that had been carefully and legally reorganized well before any filing. Not hidden, just no longer what she'd been counting on. By mid-morning, Arthur Vance received formal notice that his credit line was being called. His bank contacted him within the hour to discuss the implications. Vance Construction Group, already running on compressed margins with no room to absorb a shock, was looking at insolvency within 60 days without alternative financing. There was no alternative financing available. By afternoon, the account freezes began. Shared accounts between Clara Vance and me? Frozen, pending disclosure proceedings. Lucas Vance's personal accounts? Flagged through their connection to the fraudulent company transactions, frozen under the fraud referral's preliminary orders. Arthur Vance's personal accounts? Tied to the business through personal guarantees on the original loans, subject to attachment. 3 members of the Vale family unable to access significant liquid funds before the business day ended. I didn't leak anything.
I want to be clear about that.
I didn't call anyone, didn't post anything, didn't send anything to anyone with a platform or an appetite for family drama. I didn't need to. There were over 40 people in that room on Saturday afternoon when I held up a DNA report and asked a question nobody could answer. 40 people who drove home that evening with something extraordinary to process. 40 people with families, colleagues, neighbors, social circles. Real stories spread the way real stories always spread, person to person. Each telling slightly different, but rooted in something that actually happened in front of witnesses who could confirm it. By Tuesday, the outline was circulating. By Wednesday, it was detailed and specific. By Thursday, Arthur Vance's name appeared in local business coverage. Vance Construction Group faces creditor action amid reported governance concerns. And anyone who knew the family could connect the timeline, without being told, to the people who had attended that shower, who had watched Julian Vance place a leather folder on a gift table and walk out of his parents' house without looking back. They were telling that story to someone, and that someone was telling it to someone else. I didn't need to do anything. I'd already done everything. The family fractured exactly the way pressure fractures things along the existing fault lines, faster than anyone expected. Lucas Vance's attorney contacted my attorney within 4 days, attempting to negotiate reduced criminal exposure in exchange for cooperation on the company's financial documentation. Lucas Vance was offering to provide records that implicated others in the payment irregularities in exchange for consideration on the forgery charges. He was, in other words, trying to trade his father's exposure for his own protection. Clara Vance's attorney pivoted entirely away from any family loyalty posture within the same week and sent a disclosure demand focused exclusively on what the marriage settlement could yield. She wasn't coordinating with Lucas Vance. She wasn't coordinating with Arthur Vance. She was operating as a separate entity in a separate legal proceeding, which is exactly what she'd become. Arthur Vance stopped taking Lucas Vance's calls by the end of the first week. I know this because Eleanor Vance told me when she called, the one call I took, the only one. She asked if there was any way to stop what was happening. I told her, without coldness but without softness, I'm not doing anything to you, Mom. I'm just not doing anything for them. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she understood. I don't know if she did, but I meant it. I had no interest in destroying my parents. I was simply no longer willing to be the load-bearing wall of a structure that had been built on my willingness to absorb whatever it needed me to absorb. The structure was collapsing because it had always needed me to hold it up, and I had stopped. That's not destruction. That's consequence. The divorce finalized over the months that followed. Clara Vance's settlement reflected what the marriage actually contained after the restructuring. Not nothing, because she was entitled to what was legitimately marital, but a fraction of what she'd anticipated when she agreed to a plan that treated me as a financial instrument. Her attorney was competent and fought for what she could. It wasn't enough to make up the difference between what Clara Vance had expected and what existed. Lucas Vance's criminal inquiry moved forward. Arthur Vance sold portions of the estate to meet the company's debt obligations. The property his father built during the peak years. The grounds that were always immaculate. The specific quiet of expensive houses. Vance Construction Group survived in a stripped form, smaller, diminished, no longer the thing it had been. I moved out of the house Clara Vance, and I had shared. Bought something smaller, quieter, with a good desk and windows that face east. Took a trip alone somewhere cold, somewhere with long, empty stretches of landscape, and spent a week not thinking about any of it, just existing in a place where none of this had happened. Then I came back and went to work. People keep asking me when I tell the story whether I regret any of it, whether I wish I'd handled it differently, whether some part of me misses what it was before I knew what it was. The honest answer is that I don't spend much time on those questions. What happened, happened. What I did carefully and legally, and with full awareness of the consequences for everyone involved, including myself. I don't perform regret. I don't feel, and I don't perform, closure I haven't earned. What I'll say is this. They put me in that room on a Sunday afternoon and told me what my role was going to be. They decided before I arrived. They'd rehearsed it, structured it, poured the whiskey in advance. They needed me stable, compliant, and financially accessible. So, they called me the stable one, and expected the label to do the work. They were right about one thing. I was the only stable thing in that room. So, I took it with me when I left.